13 Americans are dead in a spiraling Middle East conflict the administration is resisting explaining to Congress. And at the exact same time, the Senate is turning a totally routine veterans bill into a scorched-earth proxy war over voting rights and gender-affirming care.
Just another Tuesday in the upper chamber. We have a lot of dots to connect today, Paige.
We really do. I'm Paige, and he's Reed. Let's start with Senate Bill 1383. Originally, this was a straightforward piece of legislation about a Veterans Advisory Committee. But right now, it is serving as the vehicle for what might be the defining legislative collision of early 2026.
Right. With unified Republican control in Washington, we are seeing the party move to execute President Trump's post-2024 mandate. And they're doing it through a massive, sweeping amendment to this veterans bill, introduced by Republican Senator John Thune of South Dakota on behalf of Republican Senator Eric Schmitt of Missouri.
It's called the Save America Act, and it is exceptionally broad. It combines a complete overhaul of federal election administration with stringent federal bans on medical procedures for transgender minors.
It's a fascinating legislative strategy. You usually see these issues handled in separate committees, but they are tying election integrity and cultural issues into one massive package. Let's look at the voting piece first. The House already passed similar provisions back in February. Think of this as an attempt to completely federalize how states register voters.
Here is what the text of the Schmitt Amendment actually says. A state may not register an individual to vote in elections for federal office held in the state, unless, at the time the individual applies to register to vote, the individual provides documentary proof of United States citizenship.
And that phrase, documentary proof, is the linchpin here. We aren't just talking about showing a driver's license at the polls. The amendment requires states to run voter rolls through Department of Homeland Security and Social Security Administration databases to verify citizenship. And if a state's election system doesn't comply, they risk losing federal funding.
Which local officials are watching very closely.
Exactly. Groups like the Brennan Center and various county election officials are warning that this is a massive unfunded mandate. They're pointing out that local election systems simply don't have the infrastructure or the budget to integrate with DHS databases overnight. Plus, you have millions of Americans who don't have immediate access to a passport or a certified birth certificate.
Then there is the second half of the amendment, which introduces severe federal criminal penalties related to gender-affirming care. From the Congressional Record, the term genital or bodily mutilation means any surgery performed for the purpose of intentionally changing the body of such individual to no longer correspond to the individual's sex.
The amendment also amends Title IX to prohibit biological males from participating in women's sports. It's essentially codifying a suite of socially conservative mandates into federal criminal law. And it's setting up what would undoubtedly be a monumental legal battle between the federal government and states that currently protect those procedures.
So that is the Republican play. But Senate Democrats are not just voting no. They are offering a counter-amendment that illustrates a completely opposite worldview on how elections should work.
Right. This is the Vote at Home Act of 2026, introduced by Democratic Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon. If the Republican amendment is about tightening the gates, the Democratic amendment is about taking the gates off the hinges.
Wyden's amendment would mandate universal mail-in voting. Here is the requirement for states. The state may not impose any additional conditions or requirements on the eligibility of the individual to cast the vote in such election by mail.
And it goes further. It establishes automatic voter registration through state motor vehicle agencies. If you interact with the DMV, your information is sent to election officials, and you are automatically registered to vote unless you explicitly opt out.
It also addresses the logistics of voting by mail. Quoting the record again, blank ballots shall be carried expeditiously and free of postage.
Which is a big deal for municipal budgets. But here's the part that is really drawing fire from conservatives. The Wyden Amendment includes specific legal protections for people who are accidentally registered by the DMV.
Right. The text says, an individual shall not be prosecuted under any federal or state law if the individual is not eligible to vote in elections for federal office, but was automatically registered to vote under this subsection due to agency error.
So you can see the fundamental clash here. Republicans are saying we need strict documentary proof to prevent non-citizens from voting, and we will penalize anyone who slips through. Democrats are saying we need automatic enrollment to expand access, and we need to protect voters from being criminalized for bureaucratic mistakes.
And they are having this debate while attaching it to a bill about veterans' access to facilities.
A classic Senate maneuver. Nothing moves until everything moves.
While the Senate argues over how we vote, there is a very real, very lethal situation unfolding overseas that is triggering a constitutional clash here at home.
This is the ongoing military conflict with Iran. It's a joint operation between the United States and Israel, and it's now entering its third week.
Which is notable because the initial projections from the administration suggested this would be over in a matter of days.
Instead, we're seeing retaliatory strikes against Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, and Kuwait. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed. Global oil prices are spiking, and most critically, 13 American service members have been killed, with roughly 200 more injured.
Democratic lawmakers are now launching a multi-front effort to force the Trump administration to explain its strategy on the record. Listen to this floor speech from a Senate Democrat demanding accountability. If you break it, you buy it. Well, Donald Trump, you broke it badly, and now you are trying to get out of paying the price.
That's the sentiment driving this. Democrats are threatening to use war powers resolutions, not necessarily to end the conflict immediately, but as procedural leverage to force Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to sit at a witness table, under oath, in front of cameras.
They have a very specific list of questions they want answered. Why are we at war? Will there be boots on the ground? And what is the exit strategy?
It's a fascinating test of institutional power. The executive branch historically resists this kind of public oversight during active military engagements, citing classified intelligence and strategic ambiguity. But when you have American casualties and spiking gas prices, the pressure on Congress to assert its oversight role becomes immense.
And that oversight pressure is boiling over in the House as well, but directed at a completely different cabinet department.
The Department of Justice.
Right. Yesterday, Democratic Representative Summer Lee of Pennsylvania introduced a formal impeachment resolution against the brand new Attorney General, Pamela Bondi.
Which is an incredibly rare move this early in a cabinet secretary's tenure. Pamela Bondi was just confirmed after the initial nominee, Matt Gaetz, withdrew his name.
The resolution is HRes 1119, and while the introduction of a resolution doesn't guarantee a vote, the clerk of the House noted the procedural weight of what happened. This document serves as the official administrative record of the initiation of these legislative processes, marking the point at which these items officially enter the House legislative pipeline for consideration, debate, and potential committee markup.
So why Bondi and why now? It comes down to a series of high-level personnel changes at the Justice Department that Democrats are characterizing as rapid politicization. Since January, the administration has removed or fired several senior career ethics officials,
including the Associate Deputy Attorney General, the Director of the Office of Professional Responsibility, and the Director of the Departmental Ethics Office.
Exactly. The people whose job it is to police attorney misconduct and maintain ethical firewalls within the DOJ are suddenly gone. Democrats are pointing to this as a crisis of federal law enforcement independence. By introducing an impeachment resolution, they are trying to pull an emergency brake.
It's a clear signal that the standard channels of committee oversight are breaking down. When you can't get documents or testimony, you reach for the heaviest constitutional tool you have.
And even if it doesn't pass the Republican-controlled House, It forces Republicans to go on the record defending the DOJ's current trajectory. It's a way to ensure the issue dominates the news cycle, rather than fading into the background.
And speaking of the Justice Department, that brings us to the kicker for today. Because while lawmakers spar over global wars and constitutional crises, the most striking fight on the floor might be about a single, very large check.
A check for $230 million, to be exact.
President Trump is currently seeking $230 million in taxpayer funds from his own Justice Department. He filed administrative complaints under the Federal Tort Claims Act, demanding compensation for damages he says he suffered during the FBI and special counsel investigations into his conduct.
Think about the mechanics of that for a second. The president oversees the executive branch. The Justice Department is part of the executive branch. So the president is essentially asking the employees he ultimately manages to approve a $250 million payout to him personally, funded by taxpayers.
Which brings us back to those fired DOJ ethics officials we mentioned earlier. With them gone, the people reviewing this claim are officials the president recently appointed.
Right. Which is why Democratic Senator Jackie Rosen of Nevada introduced an amendment to stop it. She is framing this as a direct violation of the Domestic Emoluments Clause of the Constitution.
Her amendment lays it out plainly. Any demand by a president for personal financial compensation from the Department of Justice, an agency under the executive branch of the federal government that he or she oversees, represents an extraordinary abuse of the public trust and a breach of fundamental ethical norms.
The economic context here is what lawmakers are really hammering on. You have a public currently struggling with housing costs, healthcare premiums, and inflation, watching a push for a $230 million taxpayer payout to the commander-in-chief.
Senator Rosen's resolution was blocked by Republicans recently, so Democrats have now introduced a standalone bill called the No Torts for Trump Act to try and prohibit sitting presidents from pursuing these payouts entirely.
It's one of those uniquely Washington situations where a procedural dispute over the Federal Tort Claims Act becomes a massive test of the separation of powers. We'll be tracking whether that bill gets any floor time.
That's Floor Notes for today.
Keep an eye on the footnotes out there, and we'll see you next time.